Nobody was a capitalist in that moment. Nobody stampeded, nobody shoved, nobody competed to evacuate. A paraplegic accountant was carried down 58 floors by his coworkers. A blind newspaper seller was walked home by strangers. Solidarity is so deep and instinctual that before you can even think, you slow down to be with them. And that says something about human nature.
I'm Autumn Brown, frontwoman of the soul pop band Autumn, a queer science fiction writer, a theologian, a mother of dragons, and a healing justice facilitator for social movements living on Dakota and Anishinaabe land currently known as Minneapolis.
And I'm Adrienne Marie Brown, a luscious Black queer witch writer auntie, an apocalyptic cosmic optimist, and a gardener of healing ideas. I live in the land of the Shakori, Skarura, Tuscarora, Eno, and Lumbee peoples, currently known as Durham, North Carolina.
And this is How to Survive the End of the World,
our podcast about learning from apocalypse with grace, rigor, and curiosity.
As a reminder, we have no ads. We are fully listener supported.
So join our Patreon for exclusive content. We have a really special guest today. I feel like we say that, like, our guests tend to be special.
Yeah,
and
special.
This is a very special conversation with someone who feels like in the constellation, the cosmic constellation with us of thinking about the end of the world and the beginning of the new world and that transition place in the between. So today we have a prolific writer of the heart and student of solidarity, Rebecca Solnit, a longtime climate and human rights activist who serves on the boards of Oil Change International and Third Act. Solnit is the author of over 20 books, prolific, including Hope in the Dark, Men Explain Things to Me, A Paradise Built in Hell, and most recently, the anthology Not Too Late, Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility, and this year, No Straight Road Takes You There, about the liberatory possibilities of embracing uncertainty. Welcome, Rebecca.
I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm such a huge fan of the show. And now that I can see you two, I won't confuse your voices like I often do when I'm listening.
Oh, I love that you do that. That makes me feel so great. We always wonder if people, like some people I think can really tell, and some people are like, nope, can't. But yeah, I love totally. That. Yeah, you'll really know who it is. I feel like Autumn's voice is so directive, like more, I feel like your voice is more like definitely going somewhere, and mine is like meandering along with the tree in my heart. I don't know. So, but we'll see. So the first thing we always do together is just ground and land in the moment by asking each other how we are right now at this moment on the clock of the world. So Rebecca, how are you right now?
Oh, there's always so many layers to that. And of course, when you're meeting somebody on the street or something, you give them the 3-word version. Or I've been looking since 2016 for the phrase that means I'm personally okay, but I am not oblivious to the hideous destruction and suffering all around, which I thought maybe could be I'm okay, but I'm aware of all the things that aren't. Ooh, and, yes. Joanna Macy's death,
I know.
Yeah, has been making me, and, I'm sad for the people who will miss her, sad for the time I didn't spend with her when I could have, but she had a full life in 96 years of it. But thinking about her work with despair has been making me wonder if I'm the hope lady because I'm avoiding, despair and the ways in which I survived a kind of brutal childhood by being very shut down. And it's like, are there things I'm not feeling, ways I'm not responding to horror because it's a survival skill, but I'm pretty good. And I'm super excited about the Wednesday World Court decision, an International Court of Justice decision that every nation has an obligation to address the climate crisis and is culpable if they're not doing it meaningfully. And actually got to interact a little bit with somebody you should totally interview, my dear friend, hero, poet, queer indigenous activist, lawyer, Julian Agwan, who's one of the lead lawyers on the case.
Ooh.
Okay.
And he's ebullient, which is a sign that, yes, this is fucking awesome.
Wow.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for that assignment.
Yeah,
Figure it
yeah.
out.
So I'm pretty good. I also spent a week in British Columbia. We're now in San Francisco in between June gloom and August, and so I'm kind of bummed out that it's everyone else is like barbecuing in shorts and we're clutching our cups of tea while wearing sweaters because it's gray most of the time.
Yeah, the
Wow.
Bay.
The Bay.
The Bay.
The Bay.
The Bay.
I was like, I remember those sad summer depressions. Just being like, why is it nice everywhere? Oh.
Except here.
Well, and I love that you spoke about that. What is the phrase? I think I've been saying like with awareness of all the horrors, I'm doing all right, but I feel similarly. But Autumn, how are you, my love?
I'm in the hangover, the post-show hangover. I had a live performance last night. So I don't mean hangover related to substances, but just the hangover of wow, I left it all on the stage last night. And had a really incredible, we had an incredible show. We had an incredible crowd. I got to have the experience of having super fans in the front row who knew all the music and were just vibing so hard. And it was it was very incredible. I've never had that experience. To be look in someone's eyes and be like, oh, they're singing along to me right now. So that was,
you're the Beyonce.
I was the Beyonce of that moment. And my band, I love my band. It was just and we had an incredible musician who opened for us, Nona Envy, who is just she's a star. And so we had an incredible, very magical night of music. And I've been swimming in that. And then there's I feel in the spirit of I'm okay and everything is happening. It's I'm swimming in the aliveness of getting to make art right now, which is I think the thing that is keeping me alive, keeping many of us alive is art, and getting to make art. And then there are these moments of kind of coming up into, just opening the news and the images of starvation and alongside the ongoing, what does it mean to really call it a genocide kind of conversation that's still happening that is so offensive to me at this point. I mean, it's been offensive from the beginning to me, but it offends every sensibility inside my body and angers me at a level that is really hard to describe, to see that conversation is still being highlighted by any news organization at all. And I understand the trail of money that's behind why that's happening. And it still angers me. It's it doesn't make me, understanding intellectually what's going on doesn't make me feel less angry about the fact that those two things are being put side by side, as though any reasonable person couldn't look at it and see that actively starving people is a genocide, right? It's anyway, so sort of coming to this morning, coming out of the sort of spiral of the artistic experience, coming back into the this is also part of the world that we live in. It's all part of it. It's all part of it. And so I think that how I am is ingredients in the cauldron are circling each other. You know what I mean? They're all there cooking in together. And I'm tired, but very alive feeling. Yeah. Adrienne, how are you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm resonating with the swirl of it all. I thought I keep having these moments where I think I'm doing good. I think I'm doing okay. And it's a very fragile okay, I think is kind of the thing. And I just went to work out with my sweetie, and I did I did something to open my psoas because my hips had been hurting really badly, and I just started crying, and just was like, yeah, weeping all of a sudden and trying to be like, it's, and she was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, it's not this, it's all this, and just feeling like, I've been exposing myself more again to the images and the videos, and in part because I feel so grateful that now it's like the majority of my feed. It's just like so many people now are finally, it feels like another wave of turning towards and being realistic about what's happening. Like if I think about the waves that have happened since just October 7th, like there's been times when everyone has sort of turned and been like, okay, we're all looking at Gaza, and then it turns away, and then it comes back, and then it turns away. And this feels like another moment where it's like, okay, they really are just starving these people to death. And like a ton of people are talking about it, and a ton of institutions are finally shifting their message. And it's just like how long it takes. And I've been fasting in solidarity with Gaza. And yesterday there was like a global fast. And I found it really useful as a practice to be in, to just try to go through my day with no sustenance, and to just to be in the reality of just what even a few hours, even one day like that feels like, and then to just just try to extend from that place my solidarity to Gaza, right? But yeah, there's a real tenderness and a real sense of I keep feeling like something's wrong with me or something's broken because I can't be as functional as I usually am. And this song came through the other day that was like, "We're not broken. This is how it's supposed to feel." And it was just like so tender to feel it that I was like, oh yeah, this is my aliveness, looks like grief and despair and overwhelm. And then finding these little pockets of joy and aliveness, and recognizing like even in the videos from Gaza, there are people who are like still making music, making songs, like trying to create little pockets of safety and joy for children. Like we're all, just do that. Humans do that over and over. So not giving up, still going, not being particularly productive, but I think that's okay. And yeah, and I think I need to cry more. Like I do have that feeling all the time that I'm like, I could cry all the time. And I know that I feel like culturally there have been like, that has been a role, like the town crier or someone who just like shows up to weep at the funeral or whatever. But it's just like someone who's just like, I cry. And I'm just like, yeah, I think that might be my actual job, but we don't live in a time where we get to have that as a job. I'm like, I'm crying.
You can make that your job.
I think that is. I do
there's
feel
like there's a comedian I follow on the internet who's literally trying to make it her job to be like the grudge holder. People's like getting paid to hold people's grudges.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I do feel like maybe I'm the griever. I mean,
you could be the griever.
Someone the other day, I sent them a song and they were like, "This sounds like a tear, if a tear could sing." And I was like, yeah, I think that's what my work is right now, is just to be like, I'm like, if a tear could sing. Yeah. So that's me. I am grateful. Like I keep noticing the distinction between like how grateful I am day to day, moment by moment. I feel the preciousness of my life, the preciousness of the conversations. I just got to be Autumn with you and your family last weekend, and that really filled my cup. And so, yeah. And then I know that this conversation, I'm like, this is a unique experience to get to be with you, Rebecca. And I'm very I'm grateful. I'm grateful. So, all right. So our tarot card today, the tarot card that I pulled for this episode is the Fool, which is one of my favorites. And the Fool, the keywords are beginner's mind, starting again, humility, and bliss. And the reading is: the Fool is a blessed state to be in. We can drop into beginner's mind, be seeds flung toward the earth, find our teachers, bring our curious attention to the unknown. Be kind to the parts of yourself that have room to grow, are just getting started. Be kind to the fool in others. Invite each other back into the adventure of learning. The question is, where in your life can you begin again today? And the Octavia wisdom is, earth seed cast on new ground must first perceive that it knows nothing, which at some point I was like, I'm going to make all the earth seed verses into little sing songs. And so there was like a couple months where I walked around singing, earth seed cast on new ground must first perceive that it knows nothing. Earth seed cast. And I just would walk around being like, I don't know anything. No, nothing. Anyway, so the fool and peppermint is the herb to be fresh and present and cleansing with. So that is our tarot offer for today.
What a great card for today.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take it. You know, the phrase beginner's mind was coined by Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, the Japanese Zen priest who came to San Francisco. And when he found that the young white kids who wanted to learn to meditate were much more passionate about Zen than the Japanese American congregation, he founded San Francisco Zen Center, where I sat for a dozen years and took the precepts. But also, it's a perfect card from my perspective because I have a book coming out next year. I'm working on footnotes now called The Beginning Comes After the End.
And what's that? And what's that book about, Rebecca?
You know, I feel one way to put it is a lot of times in recent years I felt like one of the characters in a horror movie, although this is much more joyful than a horror movie. Just, you know how there's the character, and I don't watch a lot of horror movies, but I know there's the character who sees something, knows something, and everybody else is like, nah, can't see it. Yeah. You imagine it, whatever. I feel like the world has changed profoundly in a lot of positive and incredible ways because of grassroots, movement-based action, beautiful ideas, voices that were suppressed, finding ways to speak and be heard. You know, the transformation of who we means in so many ways. And just that we have changed the world profoundly. And the real message of the right now is backlash. And if you listen carefully, what they're saying is, you all are very powerful. You changed the world profoundly. All the different things you did, racial justice, feminism, trans and queer rights, environmental protection, climate action, are actually the same cabal. And we hate it all. And we actually want to make America great again by making America 1958 or maybe 1858 again.
Yeah.
And so just trying to describe, because I think I experienced time in like 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, 50 year, 500 year increments. And it often feels like I'm engaging with people in media where last week is completely forgotten. And where these big changes that are victories that show us a different story about the nature of power, that show us that we're not helpless, we're not losers, and we're not living in a static world in which nothing can change. So it's really about all that stuff. It's a freakishly hopeful book in this moment. But I think if you go underneath every goddamn story everywhere being about Trump all the time, there are these much bigger stories of land back, of different relationships to land, to food. And something that's been huge for me since the early 1990s is recognizing the contemporary and historical reality of the indigenous presence on this hemisphere. Once you fully acknowledge that there was no wilderness, it was all homeland. And I should have said at the beginning, hello from the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone, just across the Golden Gate Bridge from the unceded land of the Coast Miwok, where I grew up. You know, once you recognize that, everything changes. The history of this continent and hemisphere changes. But also, I'm old now. When I was young, people assumed that human beings were inherently destructive of nature, that culture and nature were almost separate and opposing forces. Once you acknowledge that indigenous people lived here for, millennia, and that the landscape was thriving and healthy, then you break down that binary, you find other stories to tell. I think Indigenous people have been far, far more influential on the settler colonialist imagination in good ways, like that, that reframing of our relationship to nature, our inseparability from it, its ubiquitousness, the reciprocity that Robin Wall Kimmerer describes. And I find reciprocity so much more engaging a word than responsibility, which sounds like a one-way delivery of chores and services. So
versus a relationship.
Because reciprocity is like, I'm so grateful because I receive so much from you. I want to give back, and I give back in recognition of all I've received. Whereas responsibility is like, gotta mop the floor, gotta do the dishes.
Why is mopping the floor the first thing too? It's like, God, I'm gonna mop the fucking floor. Yeah. Thank you.
There's this thing that keeps coming up on social media where techies are trying to insist that somehow getting a burrito delivered is necessary because making a burrito is so hard and wasteful. And it's funny because like I could balance, Suzuki Roshi and Zen, chop wood, carry water, where the everyday tasks ground us, make us, invite us to be fully present, to live in our senses, to be of service, to be connected in ways that the burrito delivered by Grubhub doesn't necessarily. And it's super interesting. And one of the things I always try and do as a writer is to try and find a language to value those things that aren't quantified and commodified. And what is the value of making your own damn burrito? What happens when you're actually chopping the cilantro and onions or, whatever. And, a lot of the rhetoric against it is about productivity, which is about capitalism, about maximizing your labor. And as a writer, I'm like, I need breaks. Sometimes taking a walk or mopping the floor is where the writing's really happening. The writing it down is a small part of the writing.
Right.
So how did I get on that?
You just said that. I'm so glad you just said that because I'm like writing a book on love right now, and I just keep being like, I need to organize my closet, and I've been resisting it. Like, no, write the book, and sitting there and like, nope. The moment I go organize the closet, it all starts coming. The closet's full of memories. The closet's full of love stories. It's all in there.
Right.
The closet's full of dressing to meet the world, I expect, and all the different versions of you that would be part of it too. Yeah. I had a funny experience when I was writing my first book all those decades ago where I had just left what turned out to be my last job, although I assumed I was going to get another one. And I didn't want to be one of those slackers who tells you that they're working on something and then you run into them 5 years later and they've got the same spiel. And, I'd done all my research. This was a book about the visual artists who were part of West Coast beat culture and kind of the founding of the counterculture here. This kind of radical gang of people my parents' age. And I just thought like, okay, I've done all the research and now I should write the book. And I spent 3 days typing, and it was a little bit like that thing about, 16 chimpanzees with typewriters if you give them 8 billion years, we'll write Shakespeare. But in the meantime, it's gibberish. And it just didn't work. And I had to stop and think about what is writing. And writing is mostly all the things that come before and all the things that come after typing. And a lot of it is just thinking and finding out. And it looks like doing nothing. Once a boyfriend called me and said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, well, if you're here, I'd have to say I'm lying in bed staring at the ceiling. But you're not here. I'm writing.
So I'm writing. I love it.
Yeah, take those walks, make those burritos, wander aimlessly. And I feel like so often we're looking for the thing we don't know, or we need the thing we don't know yet, and being open is how we find it. Maybe this is something the Fool card also is being, and that figure kind of joyfully moving through the world.
Yeah. I want to bring us into our questions. And I feel like this piece that you named about reciprocity versus responsibility is such a beautiful, it gives us a beautiful segue into the conversation about solidarity, because this whole season has been about solidarity as a deep act of love. And I think we've been working a lot with the complexity of like, you know, how you understand what solidarity is deeply informs how you imagine or understand an act of solidarity, right? And if we're thinking about solidarity through the lens of responsibility, it's not going to necessarily be as loving of an act as if we think about it through the lens of reciprocity. So I really appreciate that framing. And we wanted to ask you, Rebecca, I mean, you have such a long storied history of activism, and we would love to hear you talk about who taught you about solidarity and what that word means to you.
In a way, I'm an activist because my younger brother, David, was an activist, and we were really close, and he kept volunteering to do the newsletter, which is not his particular skill set. And then in the 80s, when he was working on anti-intervention and then anti-nuclear things, he'd call me up and say, "Hi, I volunteered to do the newsletter." And I'd be like, "Okay, bring it over." And, you know, and then when I left that last job and I had more time, I volunteered with Rainforest Action Network, which was such an amazing place to be in the late 80s because the rainforest and movements, and there was a few other things working on it, had to recognize that they were dealing with what in North America we call wilderness, but this was also homeland, and that human rights and environmental action were actually inseparable. So there was a kind of solidarity there. And that first thing I mentioned, that incredible U.S. solidarity movement with Central America against the death squads, against the Reagan administration and the right-wing terrorism against the Sandinistas and stuff. And one of my brothers actually went to Nicaragua for 5 years in the Sandinista era, my wonderful brother, Steve. So, but I think, and then the next step, partly through David, I started going to the Nevada test site where the U.S. has exploded more than 1,000 nuclear bombs between 1951 and 1991, even while so many anti-nuclear activists, among others, thought nuclear war was a thing that might happen someday. And the wonderful thing for us that happened is these Western Shoshone elders showed up and said, "Hey, this is our land. We're going to give you permits to trespass or to be on what they call trespassing on this federal, you know, this supposedly high security site the size of Connecticut ringed with barbed wire, which is a pretty low security form of security. And we want our land back, and we want it back undestroyed." And that led to me becoming really deeply involved with the state of Nevada in a bunch of different ways, becoming close to a key Nevada organizer, my friend B. Fulkerson, and becoming sort of a core member of the Western Shoshone Defense Project, led by two extraordinary matriarchs and ranchers in northeastern Nevada, Carrie and Mary Dan. And I think that was a deep experience of solidarity, because one of the things that I think really comes out, like in Astra Taylor's book with her collaborator, whose name I cannot recall, you know, on solidarity, is that solidarity is always across difference, you know, that it's, and I think it means that you're always learning in solidarity, you know, and that it's kind of a big tent thing. It's about the things we have in common matter more than the things we don't. And so, you know, so those were some of the experiences, I think, of solidarity. And then I have been in the Bay Area since before kindergarten. I've been in San Francisco since I was 18. I think living in what was back in the day the queerest city around, I wouldn't say solidarity. I never claimed to be a queer ally because that suggests that I'm like some kind of necessary, valuable soldier for the cause. I just say I'm queer adjacent. Even as a state... Thank you. Guffaws are a special reward around here.
Yeah.
But also, you know, liberation is contagious, which isn't exactly solidarity, but being in and around a queer community was an invitation. It's like, if you don't have to play by the rules, then, oh, wow, I don't have to play by the rules. So I think solidarity is also about the invitations we give each other across those differences. And, so those are some of the things I think. And this is, of course, a question where I'm like, oh, if they let me sit in the corner for 3 days and do some research, I really have an answer.
There, right?
But those were early formative experiences drawing me into a bigger world of Central America, of U.S. politics, of environmental politics, of the rainforest, and of indigenous land rights and indigenous struggles, of broken treaties.
Right.
The fact, and that experience led to my second book, Savage Dreams, which was about the nuclear wars that weren't supposed to have started yet, and the Indian wars that were supposed to be long over actually happening simultaneously in a West not very many people recognized. I kind of hate the title now. I seemed clever at the time, but it was really...
Time changes things.
Well, there was this evil figure named James Savage who led the U.S. Army into Yosemite, the first white incursion into Yosemite Valley, to essentially genocide the people there to maximize the profit of the gold rush. And I thought the irony of this man being named Savage said a lot, and it does when you reach page 223 or whatever. Until then. So
Well, I want to uplift the book you referenced. Solidarity is co-authored from Ostra Taylor and Leah Hunt Hendricks.
Yes,
who we've referenced their work in other episodes. But yeah, thanks for lifting them up into this moment too. And that answer resonates. I feel like there's so many pieces of my own story too, where it was like, oh, it was coming in contact with indigenous leadership. It was coming in contact with people fighting for and from the land. And I think right now we're all trying to learn to be in community with each other during a period of immense overwhelm, extreme overwhelm. There are so many front lines that all need all of our attention. And, I think you have been really focused on climate for most of the time that I've been watching your work, feminism and climate, but really this climate piece. And I've had moments where I was just like, I can't believe we have to think about anything other than what's happening with the earth. I feel like it feels like there's so much that at times has felt like distraction, to me, that I'm like, y'all, like the house is burning. The house, the only place that we can survive is being made uninhabitable for us. And sometimes I think, okay, maybe that's okay. Maybe, the earth will just have to shake us off like it has done with so many other things. But then I also feel my attention pulled into things. And I'm like, these are not distractions either. This is also a front line. This is also a microcosm of justice, a microcosm of what's possible for us. So I find myself doing that work of prioritizing, that I have one life, I have a limited amount of time that I get to be on this earth, and I can't do every single front line. So where can I pour my energy into that feels like it can have the most impact? And I wondered, for you in this time, do you find yourself doing that? And what is kind of guiding you in terms of what you're choosing to prioritize, putting your attention and your time and your acts of solidarity towards?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I've spent less time thinking about climate in the last 6 months than at any time in the last 10 years. And, and I'm not ignoring it, but it feels like in this country, we have to claw back the democracy that allows us to actively participate in deciding the fate of the earth. That, and one thing that I think is striking is that it is all, and so much of, I think, the ideology of our side, to use that annoying shorthand, is that everything is connected. You can see what's happening in Palestine, what's happening to rainforests, what's happening to indigenous people, what the fossil fuel industry is, etc. You can see a politics of deep connection and a politics of disconnection. I've been saying for more than 20 years that the terms left and right, founded in France, revolutionary France in the 18th century, are not necessarily that useful as descriptors anymore, but kind of connectors and disconnectors are. And you can see the entire Trump MAGA world as radical disconnection from nature. The idea that Women are absolutely separate from men. And of course, there's two little gender prisons, and everyone has to be stuffed into one of them, and they're very separate. And non-white and white, Christian and non-Christian, American and non-American. And actually, one thing I've been involved in different ways, and I can't say I've done anything tremendous about it, but it's kind of taking a lot of space in my heart and my mind, is the attack on immigrants, which is also the pretense that borders are, ecologically borders don't exist.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people they're attacking are indigenous to this continent, as we settler colonialist types are not. And something that at the beginning, when I realized Trump was coming back, I was like, something's going to trigger the big reaction, the big pushback against them. And it could have been the attack on trans rights or reproductive rights and women, the crimes and the violations of the law, the destruction of the federal government. And I'm actually kind of excited that it's immigrants, that there's a kind of solidarity, particularly right now in LA, but seeing people who are not being targeted by ICE, surrounding ICE trucks, protecting their neighbors, all the other forms of activism, I find really beautiful. The refusal to be separate, the refusal to say, my fate is not your fate. I don't have to care about what happens to you because I'm different than you. And that, I think, is the purest essence of solidarity, that I care about you, and that, there's that famous solidarity, not charity, from Eduardo Galeano that became the slogan of the Common Ground Action after Hurricane Katrina, that made that their slogan, solidarity, not charity. And I actually wrote about it in that most recent book, in my essay about the Anti-Sewing Squad that Christina Wong founded, our group that sewed 1/3 cloth masks during the height of the pandemic. Because I had to ask myself, why do we use the phrase mutual aid when so often what's actually happening in terms of the redistribution of resources is largely one way? And I was like, oh, it's because mutual aid acts on the premise that we are already existing in mutuality. I am not separate from you. What benefits you benefits me. Whereas charity is like, I have things and you lack things, and I'm going to dump some, you lucky dog. And so,
I like that.
so I think there's also that solidarity is the mutual aid that recognizes that we were always mutual, we were always connected. And so I'm really interested now in all the different versions of a politics of inseparability versus the politics of division, which I think is the kind of underlying struggle right now. And around the environment, around the dividing of people in categories and trying to pit them against each other, and all the rest.
That's great.
I really appreciate this, the framing up you just offered about mutual aid, because I often think that one of the defining features of mutual aid is, or what makes it mutual, is the recognition that the only difference between your crisis and my crisis is time. Like, when in time are we? Because crisis and the conditions in which we need to figure out our own survival, or need to figure out our survival in relationship to other people, those conditions come for all of us. Especially now, I think we're really seeing that more and more as the climate catastrophe begins to really spread across the US. I think people are starting to really recognize, like, oh, our continent is not protected from our society, and our society has no infrastructure in place that actually protects people from the worst of the climate crisis. So really appreciate that. And actually, another great segue into a question we want to ask you, which is about one of my favorite books of yours, Paradise Built in Hell. One of the things I love about that book is how you really demonstrate how people actually are in crisis versus what our stories about people are in crisis. And the ways that our default response in a crisis or a disaster scenario is to turn towards each other and work together. And that is typically the actual disaster there's the traumatic event, but the actual disaster happens when the state comes in and tries to reassert authority. And the stories that you tell in that book just are beautifully demonstrate that pattern. And I was wondering if you could put some of that, the lens that you brought to that work, and just like looking at our current conditions here in US society and what you're seeing in terms of how people are turning towards each other and how that's happening in a relationship to state intervention and climate catastrophe.
Yeah, the essence of the book, for listeners who haven't read it, is that most of what you've been told about how we respond to disasters, especially what you've been told by mainstream media in the past and by Hollywood disaster movies, is false. Ordinary people do not become marauding wolves or stampeding, panicking sheep in a disaster. Mostly we're calm, we're brave, we're resourceful, we're creative, we take care of each other, we rescue each other, we rebuild the conditions of survival. People do not panic and flee disasters. There's actually something that can actually become a problem called disaster convergence, because so many people show up to help that, it's the equivalent of a kind of resources and human and sometimes car traffic jam. And underlying that, I think, is a revelation about human nature. This interesting thing happened in the New York Times obituary for Joanna Macy that I read yesterday. They quoted something she said when she first told a therapist in the 70s that she was sad or devastated about a forest being cut down. And the therapist, this was back in the evil days of Freudianism, told her that was just her repressed libido. In a sense, what the therapist, which somehow I'm assuming was male, was saying is that all we care about is personal things, that we're basically selfish. We're basically very small beings. We only care about ourselves and our immediate satisfactions, that we're not ideological beings. We don't care about truth, justice, the well-being of the natural world, the well-being of children in Gaza, that all this is false or somehow, selfish, etc. And so something I find super fascinating, underlying these stories about disaster, are arguments about human nature. The version we get from the Hollywood movies and the authorities, who often respond badly in disasters, says that human beings are basically selfish and chaotic, which justifies authoritarianism. Whereas what we actually see in every major disaster, with some complications, is that people actually, in the moment where the state essentially ceases to exist because it's overwhelmed, because there's a blackout, because a fire department can respond in a city like mine to 10 fires, but it can't respond to 1,000 fires. The state ceases to exist and people become wonderful. It's everything an anarchist ever wanted to believe. And so I think I wrote that book because I knew that there was that the age of climate crisis would mean more disasters and more urgent, and more intense disasters. And, this book is 16 years old. We're now there.
You were looking backward to say, this is how we are. And I'm wondering, looking at the now we're here in the midst of what you were predicting. And what do you think of how we're responding?
And it's interesting seeing, and one of the things that's been moving to me about both Trump terms is seeing a version of human nature in which people care deeply about justice, the rule of law, human rights, constitutional rights, equality. They care deeply about the good work that USAID was doing, about foreign aid, about protection of the environment. Because again and again, like that passage Joanna Macy mentioned, we're told that we're very selfish people. We want, it's not that we don't want these things. We want sex, love, security, nice things. And it's basically a narrative that privatizes us. During the age when we talked about neoliberalism all the time, the anti-globalization movement era of the late 90s, early 2000s, I really learned that before you can privatize an economy, you have to privatize psyches. And the
Sorry, that's just
anti-solidarity.
awesome.
Sorry, I know.
I like that. I like that.
Oh my
Okay,
God, that
I
just
should.
changed. That just was a good changing thought.
Yeah, yeah. You have to convince people we have nothing in common. There's no benefit to shared public resources, public space, public transportation, public libraries, public health care, etc. And so and what's amazing about how people respond in disasters is that even people who've been told nothing that their whole lives, who've made that their careers, that's not who they are in a disaster. One of the things that was so exciting for A Paradise Built in Hell is looking at what actually happened in the World Trade Center when the two planes crashed into it on September 11th, 2001. Nobody was a capitalist in that moment. Nobody stampeded, nobody shoved, nobody competed to evacuate. A paraplegic accountant was carried down 58 floors by his coworkers. A blind newspaper seller was walked home by strangers. Strangers helped each other. And there's this one story that, even though I've told it 100 times, blows my mind every time. This young man doing an oral history about his experience of the disaster says to the interviewer with absolute unself-consciousness, he's evacuating with his coworkers, the towers are collapsing, this cloud of deadly, pulverized glass, metal, toxins, cement, whatever is coming at them. And he says, well, I was an athlete in college, so I was a little faster than my coworkers, so I slowed down. And it's like, oh my God, you're running for your life. You can run faster than everybody else. These are not the people you're closest to who are most meaningful to you. They're not your beloveds, they're your coworkers. But solidarity is so deep and instinctual that before you can even think, you slow down to be with them. And that says something about human nature, because I think one way to describe the connectors versus disconnectors is that we're having a huge argument about human nature. Who are we and who are we and what do we want? And what A Paradise Built in Hell's research convinced me is, when you see the joy of people in so many disasters, including Katrina, 9/11, the 1906 earthquake, where this work started for me, along with my own experience in the 1989 earthquake here in San Francisco, and the London Blitz, and so many of these things, it turns out that even when your world has literally fallen apart, when a hurricane, a bomb, a terrorist attack, earthquake has hit your city, you can light up with joy because you found the meaning, the connection, the sense of membership in civil society, the agency that was missing from everyday life, which is another kind of disaster of anomie and alienation. And so that's who I think we really are and what we really want. And you can convince some people more than others to privatize the self, to believe we have nothing in common, that all they really want is stuff. Something I've been thinking about and need to write about soon is that one of the striking things about the richest people in the world is how miserable they are, because actually wealth isolates, and the logic of wealth is that you want to isolate yourself. You live in a gated community, you buy an island, you have a security perimeter.
Yeah, and then you have no trust, no connection, no togetherness, no softness, no authenticity.
No relationships with people that aren't reliant on you for money.
Or hoping to use you in some way. So I find, all of this, and you could say this about the current US administration, is arguing that, that white people, and fucking J.D. Vance, white people who were here from the Civil War and before, not like us ethnic whites, real Americans have nothing in common with all that rabble, and white people with non-white people, straight people with non-straight people, cis people with trans people, Americans with non-Americans, humans with the non-human. And you can see, and I call it the ideology of isolation. I've written about it a bunch of times. And in a way, it's a rhetoric that allows you to become tremendously powerful in the most tangible terms. A phrase I use constantly is the tyranny of the quantifiable, from my environmental writer, Friendship Ward. But in other terms, it spiritually, emotionally impoverishes you through that disconnection that's imaginative as well as real. And one of the things that Thelma and I argue in our climate work, Thelma being Thelma Young Lutuna Tabua, my co-editor on Not Too Late, my lovely climate anthology that we got to interview Adrian for, is not only if we do everything the climate crisis requires of us, could we enter an age of unprecedented abundance with the limitless power of sun and wind to run our machines, to literally decentralize power in the political as well as the electrical sense. But we need to get there by reframing what abundance is. That, I want everyone to have enough food, enough shelter, enough pretty clothing, like I bet Adrian's closet, etc. And in a society in which you can have nothing, I think you can never have enough, which kind of explains the greed and, the kind of hungry, gross greed of capitalism. But that we could have abundance of hope and confidence in the future, abundance of connection, not only to other human beings, but to nature and to our deepest selves, because we have an abundance of time and an abundance of security. So I'm really bummed out that the word abundance has been co-opted for this kind of neoliberal deregulation rhetoric, because I want abundance to mean something much more radical. That's not only the fact that we live in a world of incredible abundance. There's no shortage of anything. The fact that half the world is trying to bring food to Gaza and people are starving just makes the fact that there was no shortage of anything. There's just distribution problems, which is important. But also I think we need to think about what else abundance is besides stuff, because one of the arguments used against climate action is that the pretense that we now live in a world of abundance, which the great majority of people on Earth do not when it comes to material things. And even those of us who live in material abundance don't live in abundance of connection, hope, joy, confidence about the future, justice, equality, etc. So, and that
I feel like you keep preempting or like sort of something, and you can always feel the question that's coming from us, which is great. That I think that's like something emerges. And I love that, because the place that I wanted to go to next was talking a little bit about the Not Too Late book and some of what's been happening just in this last month, this last week. So a few of the big climate activists, climate scientists, other folks have been coming out. Most notably, I saw a piece from David Suzuki saying we have crossed the point of no return when it comes to climate, and we are in this new level of it. We need to stop trying to fight back, basically, and it's time to hunker down and prepare ourselves to just survive what's coming. And which there's parts of that feel aligned with what we're talking about, right? Which is like, get into community and think about survival in a very place-based and a localized and a networked community way. But that hopelessness over it, the top of it all, that despair over the top of it all, feels so different from how I view your work and what I see when I come to see what you're uplifting, which, I was looking at your page and I was like, you're really uplifting global climate victories and things that really feel like this actually still is moving us in the right direction. And it makes me, I'm sort of like, I kind of just want to like figure out how this all lands with you, right? Is it like, are we in a not too late place? Or is that more of the sort of Western American center of the world worldview where it's like, we're in a total crisis and collapse and democratic, catastrophe that then rolls out from what our climate participation can even be right now? Because like you said, when you don't have a functional democracy, you can't have a functional participation in a true climate struggle. But I wanted to ask you about that. Like, are you being like, well, I'm just going to bring my attention to where we are winning? Or, how's that all landing with you?
I feel like my voice exists in a context that there's a kind of ecosystem of voices. Yeah. If particularly white American culture was overly optimistic and confident and cheerful. I probably feel like it was my job to deliver the bad news. But in case you hadn't noticed, white American culture, is super
a bit of a
fucking
downer.
yeah, it's super fucking defeatist. It denies its own power. It's, it's sort of doomer culture. It's we have no power. We never win. And I wrote Hope in the Dark, the original essay I wrote 22 years ago, because when the war on Iraq, the Bush war on Iraq started, a lot of people I was close to and a lot of people around me immediately went from the true fact of we did not stop the war to we didn't do anything. That was untrue. In fact, we had delayed the war. Some countries like Turkey didn't participate. Later, Spain withdrew because of public protest. I think the people of Iraq probably noticed that the single biggest day of protest in world history on all 7 continents, I think was February 14th, 2003. I think it gave people time to prepare for bombardment. They actually changed the shape, I believe, of shock and awe. So it was the bombing of Baghdad wasn't as extreme. But so people went from we didn't stop the war, true, to we didn't do anything, untrue. I think a lot of it was unquantifiable and mattered in less, so much of defeatism is, 2 + 2 has to equal 4 immediately, or whereas we're engaging in these long algebraic calculations in which impact is often indirect and slow. And of course, you want to stop the bombing. But they went from there to we have no power, we never win, we never change anything, etc. And what I'd been learning from the collapse of the East Bloc regimes in 1989, the Zapatista uprising, the resurgence of indigeneity, the end of the Soviet Union, gains for women and queer people and everything else, is that actually we win a lot. We don't win everything, but we don't lose everything. So with climate, I'm just trying to think of how to frame it, that like things keep getting worse in terms of the actual state of the planet. And I don't know if it would be worse if we didn't have the solutions, or if we did have the solutions, because we do have the solutions, if we did have the solutions but weren't implementing them. We've known for a very long time exactly what the problem is and exactly what to do about it. The obstacles are not some flawed human nature, which a lot of shitty analysis suggests because the reality is most people care deeply about climate change, want to see their governments spend money on it. They want to see the energy transition. They support renewables, etc. And, it's a small cabal of fossil fuel interests and allies who are preventing us from doing what we need to do. And it's just a mix. Is it all good? Hell no. Is it all bad? Not that either. Bill McKibben has a book coming out called Here Comes the Sun about the solar revolution. And there's an excerpt of it in the New Yorker where he says it's accelerated in the past 2 years to a point of it's unstoppable and it's so transformative. And I'm talking to you from California, where we have days where we get 150% of our electricity for part of the day from solar. The excess goes into batteries. So the sun is running our machines at night. California is kind of demonstrating, as is a number of other places, I like grammar, that used to be a copy editor, that, And here, to go back to kind of where I started talking about how I see the world, when you look at all the wonky reports, and God knows how this English major ended up looking at graphs all the time, not an English major thing, but a climate activist thing. Most of the graphs will show you how the price of solar dropped over the last year or 18 months, or how the implementation of solar went up over the last 18 months. That's pretty fucking exciting. But if you look at the last 25 years, you see something so mind-blowingly revolutionary. And I feel a little bit like some kind of Paul Revere, Cassandra, Chicken Little running around shouting about it all the time. We had an unbelievable energy revolution. If, just like if you could phone 1960 and tell somebody what women's status was compared to where it was in 1960, if you could phone 2000 and say, those really expensive, utterly inadequate, primitive wind and solar technologies are going to become so cheap and effective that we actually can leave fossil fuel behind. We truly did not have a solution to the fossil fuel crisis that was producing runaway climate change 25 years ago. The new technologies just weren't there. And the revolution has been so incremental, meaning it's too slow for people who want things to be instant, including the media, which mostly reports on something that went bang yesterday. And it's been so incremental and so technical, so economic, so widely distributed that it's largely invisible unless, journalists like Bill McKibben run around and sum it up. And so that's incredibly hopeful. And so the short answer is, I don't know. And everything we can save is worth saving. And the metaphor I always use, and this goes back to A Paradise Built in Hell, a book I wrote also because Hurricane Katrina made me realize we need to know what's in that book, which is what not special Rebecca sauce. It's what I learned from the disaster sociologists, the oral histories, the people who already knew but so I spent a ton of time in New Orleans after Katrina because the real story wasn't being told. And there was this fake story cooked up by the media and the governmental authorities about marauding, out of control Black people that justified turning New Orleans into a gulag. People were not allowed to escape during that crucial period, which is why almost all the Katrina deaths were in New Orleans. The real story was about white vigilantes and cops murdering Black people and other people, white people with power, preventing the life-saving evacuations. But here's the story I want to tell about climate that I think has been a guiding metaphor for me for what will be, Katrina will be 20 years next month. The day after Katrina, even while the news was making it sound like it was this dangerous, crazy place, there was bumper to bumper traffic of people with boat trailers to get into the city to launch their vessels when it got dubbed the Cajun Navy. Nobody who put a boat in there knew for sure they could save anyone. All of them knew they couldn't save anyone. All of them knew there might be different kinds of risks. And that's where we always are in the world. We can't save everything, but that doesn't mean we can't save anything. If we sit home saying we can't do anything, so we can't save everyone, and don't launch our boats, we're definitely not going to save anyone. But thousands upon thousands of people were evacuated by these people coming from as far away as Texas to put their boats in the water and out of solidarity and just see what they could do. And whatever this state of the biosphere, there are things worth saving. Every 10th of a degree, we can keep the temperature down, or the climate, the global temperature down, saves lives, saves species, saves environments. And one of the things we also hardly ever talk about is we actually know if we went carbon negative, we could reverse climate change. Some things we would stabilize the climate and the temperature and stop things from getting worse. Some things like the melting of ice and the rising of seas are locked in for centuries, but lots of things aren't. So I'm not hopeful. Well, something that's always really important with my hope work is to distinguish between hope and optimism, because I always say optimism, pessimism, doomerism, despair, cynicism, all assume that we know the future, and therefore nothing is required of us. I see it for comfortable, privileged people as a cop-out. And something that I've really learned a lot from is the most impacted frontlines people do not have those attitudes. At some level, there's a kind of hope just for the next day's meal, for survival, for the possibility that things could change, for the worthiness of the struggle, because alternatives to give in to your own destruction, your children's destruction, your people's destruction, your country's destruction. And so hope for me is not confidence about the future. It's confidence that it's worth trying, because the future is being made in the present. The rhetoric of inevitability pretends that the future already exists. The number of false prophets out there, people who announce what's going to happen or not. Sometimes in a vindictive way, I want to like copy all that down and come back. Like all the people who told me Susan Collins was not going to vote against the budget bill and people were wasting their time. And Susan Collins is a despicable human being who did actually vote against the budget bill. And, the people who know what's going to happen are the people who are not doing anything. The people who are like, let's make this happen, are my people. And that's the very essence of hope. Not that we know, but that it's worth trying, that we're going to launch our boats. Yeah, that's kind of my whole philosophy. Launch your boat. Launch your boat. See what you can do. Because, that's the only way you'll know.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Oh, I feel my instinct is that is where we land this conversation. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We're so grateful to have your wisdom and your stories, and
I feel moved.
So moved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to our show. We're on Instagram at End of the World PC and on Blue Sky as ourselves.
You can make a sustaining donation to our show by visiting our page at patreon.com/endoftheworldshow. And if you become a patron, or you are one already, you get our show inside a show, Top Culture, which we release every Monday after each new Friday episode.
Another thing you can do to help our show sustain itself is to write us a review on Apple Podcasts if you're an iPhone person. Why would you do this? It's because it helps people who are looking for good new content to find us. Thank you.
How to Survive the End of the World is produced and edited by the galactic and intergalactic Zach Rosen. Transcripts are in our show notes and on our website at endoftheworldshow.org.
Music for today's show comes from Autumn, the band, Tunde Alaniran, Mother Cyborg, and the Banksons.